For a while now, I've been putting two and two together that the purpose of education has moved very far away from the idea of imparting knowledge upon young people and definitely moved into the direction of creating social justice activists. But all of that has just been putting two and two together. Until today, I've been sent an unbelievable teacher resource for creating what they call positive spaces, in other words, a GSA. And I would normally try to unpack it and show you bits and pieces, but I think I need to pretty much read through this whole document, so stay with me. Before I get into it, I would recommend that you watch my video, What is a Queer Child? Because it is going to give you a lot more background as to why this is happening. I'll give a few interpretations throughout the document, but it's a great video to go watch. Okay, I'm going to take you through this document from beginning to end, except I'm actually going to start at the end because the most interesting bit is on the very last page. Now, understand that this is helping teachers to create GSAs. It is in, I think, the Halton Wentworth District School Board here in Ontario. But one of the biggest points of contention in all of the schools, well, between schools and parents at the minute when it comes to ideology, especially queer and trans ideology, is the keeping secrets from parents. And at the very last page, let me just read you this. Posture of practice. Parent, guardian, caregiver permission is not required for participation in secondary and elementary positive space groups. They're not calling it a GSA anymore. I wonder if this is something like, I wonder if that's on purpose. So it's not Gender Sexuality Alliance or Gay Straight Alliance, but positive space. So watch out for that positive space. School staff must do everything they can do to prevent students from being outed to their families and or school communities. Adopt a posture of practice and listen to students. They know who they are and they know what they need. So I'll listen to you, kids. I won't tell your parents. Defining and establishing rules and expectations around confidentiality within the group is of utmost importance. Do not assume that students understand what confidentiality entails. It's crucial to remind students that being out with one group of friends or family members does not mean one is out with everyone. It may be beneficial to review confidentiality scenarios with students to openly discuss the nuances of outing someone. It's critical to take steps to avoid student unintentionally outing their peers. What they just said is that they want to run confidentiality scenarios or confidentiality and scenarios with students to help them, to coach them on how to keep secrets under the guise of not outing anyone. Wow. Wow, this goes far beyond anything that I thought was actually going on. Whew. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Positive space best practice, a guidebook for creating a safe space for two-spirit LGBTQIA plus communities and allies. Well, I guess that's the rebranding of GSA. A living document. Two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, and other terms are social constructs that some 2S LGBTQIA plus people may choose to identify themselves. However, it's necessary to acknowledge that references to sexual orientations and diverse gender identities are often conflated and limiting. Modern terminology, although constantly evolving in bold, may still lack a nuanced understanding of gender diverse identities and sexual orientations as separate and unique experiences. So we know they're social constructs and they're constantly evolving. So they can't possibly be based in fact or a knowable something that we can measure and understand. No, it's an ephemeral idea that's constantly changing and shifting and can be whatever you like. While understanding and expressions of human sexuality and gender identity is progressing, it's important to recognize that current social labels may unintentionally marginalize or render invisible the lived experiences of individuals and communities who do not identify as such. For example, the disparity is illustrated in the fact that there are over 150 words for and terms in various indigenous languages in North America and were used prior to contact to describe the peoples of various gender, various gender diversity. So it's not a knowable fact. It's not something we can pinpoint. It could be anything. It could be nothing. But we're still going to create this group, this positive space group. We're not going to call it a GSA anymore because we're beyond that. We've progressed, right? This idea has evolved, has progressed. And so now we have a positive space to talk about the things that we can't possibly know. That could be this, but could be that. But don't marginalize anyone if we don't know what they are yet. What is a positive space? Positive space may be offered as a student-led, teacher-facilitated club in elementary and secondary schools. Positive space clubs provide a supportive and accepting space in which students and staff can talk and learn about sexual orientation, gender identity, and the issues and challenges faced by 2S LGBTQIA+ communities. Supportive and accepting spaces. You say what you say you are, and we just accept everything that you say. And don't forget, we won't tell your parents about the thing that you possibly don't know, that can't possibly be known, that may shift, but we'll accept you. It's okay, kids. Come in. It's a safe space. Positive space groups may also organize and facilitate school-wide exploring topics such as heteronormativity, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia in school. Remember, heteronormativity is a purely ideological word meant to basically just describe human nature, that we are a sex species, like all sexual dimorphic species, and we reproduce sexually, which means that basically you have a male and a female gametes that come together to produce babies, and that's how people reproduce. But they turn this into a social construct, an ideological construct, that it is an oppressive force to expect that everybody's expected to be that. Now, accepting that we're a sexually dimorphic species does not mean that we can't be okay with homosexuality, because it does happen in our species, but it's actually a small number of people. And if everybody suddenly became not heterosexual, we would struggle to reproduce. And so what they're doing is they're actually marginalizing, or actually making uncool, or making oppressive normal human functioning. And let's not even get in to talk about misogyny, because there's trans misogyny, right? If you kind of don't think men should be in female spaces, that's trans misogyny. And the definitions of homophobia, transphobia, and whatever, biphobia are just so broad nowadays that they're encompassing anything that doesn't align with this way of thinking. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Positive space clubs are open to students and staff who identify as part of the two-spirit LGBTQIA+ communities, as well as their straight and cisgender allies. They operate like any other student group, with staff, advisor, and regular meetings. Permissions are not required for participation. No permission slips. No, we don't need that for this group. I actually don't know if other groups, other social clubs, need permission slips at this school, but this one in bold, we don't need permission slips for this club. And we've changed the name. So parents, if your kid goes, I'm going to positive space group, well, no one would know that it's the GSA, because we've called it something else now. Types of positive space clubs. An effective positive space club is student-driven and reflects the need of people who attend. There's no single way to facilitate a positive space group. That's not true. And how each school's clubs function should reflect the unique needs and goals of the students, which is going to be guided by teachers 100%. Positive space groups should offer diversity in experiences, but remember, only the right kind of diversity in experiences. Groups may explore and share knowledge about different queer and trans communities outside of the Western context, only about queer identities. I thought this was about homophobia. The principles and practices of culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy can be implemented effectively into a positive space group. Now, remember, you might not remember if you haven't seen this video, but just in my previous video, the one I just put out about the history of pedagogies, the critical pedagogies, culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy is a mix of all entirely Marxist-driven pedagogies, and it's about interrogating everything from a ideological lens, which is a far left Marxist ideological lens, so that you can learn to read your world politically. They're using far left radical methods to drive people in a certain direction to see the world through a Marxist lens. That's what they're saying here. For example, students may explore the experiences of queer and trans youth from a variety of cultural lenses, read politically, and discuss and reflect upon the impact of colonialism, and voila, on queer and trans perspectives, because apparently Indigenous people weren't sexually dimorphic before the European white man arrived to colonize their sexual dimorphic reproduction. Depending on the students and goals of the Positive Space Club, approaches, activities, and initiatives may change week to week, month to month, and year to year. The foci and types of Positive Space Clubs may overlap and merge. For example, a club may function as a social space for students to make friends, while also engaging in social activism. They might choose to engage in social activism, but it's student-led. We're not going to drive them in that direction. They may choose to engage in that. The type of group will transform to best meet the needs of students in any given moment, and this is expected. Oh yeah, we're not going to drive them in the direction of activism, but we're definitely going to use CRRP to help them view the world from a critical lens so that they may see all of these hidden injustices that they may not have previously seen before, but it's just a social club and they may choose to engage in activism. To guide initial conversations with students about the direction and goal of their clubs, advisors may wish to consider and discuss the common types of positive space clubs. To guide the students. Well, what are the kind of clubs? Social. Some positive space clubs tend to focus on making friends and developing allyship. Allyship is just solidarity. It's just Marxist fist stuff. It's in-group creation. A social group may create fun and engaging activities and plan social events to build community and to develop relationships. Many groups start as a social group as students get to know each other. Many groups start as a social group as students get to know each other. This is the Mott and Bailey. They may be a social group. No, it starts that way. It's building community and develop relationships. It's the draw in. It's the love bombing into the group. And also, don't forget, we're going to keep it secret. We're going to keep it secret. Only we know you. We're your friends. We're the in-group. You can trust us. It's just a social group. You may engage in activism, but it's just a social group. But yeah, many groups start as a social group. Isn't it funny that they go into the other groups later? What are support groups? Some positive space groups share lived experiences without parental consent and create a safer space for conversations and reflection. Conversations and reflection about sexuality and adult topics, including elementary school teachers without parental knowledge or consent, and we're going to train you to be real quiet. And then activists, some positive space groups focus on education and improvement of school climate. Activist groups take social stigma and combat prejudice, hate, and bias, planning and implementing awareness-raising campaigns and social justice-driven events. That is the goal of these groups. The goal of these groups is to draw you in, make you feel like you're part of an in-group, do all that love bombing. Then you start doing the support stuff, the support group. We're going to share all of our lived experience. I'm going to believe you. Your parents might not believe you, but I believe you. And we're going to go through scenarios on how to keep secrets. We don't tell other people. This is a safe space. And then we're going to talk about how use culturally relevant pedagogy to help you see the world through a political lens so that you can then start thinking about how you can develop your activism within the special in-group that we're going to keep real quiet. This is unbelievable, right? I mean, I could end this here, and that should be enough to make you realize what is going on in these schools. This is a teacher resource, okay? Teacher resource. They're telling teachers to do this in the school board. Oh, and here we go. The types of positive space groups intersect and merge. A group may function as one thing, depending on the moment, then transition into another type, depending on the needs of the students and advisor. It might. I mean, it might not, except it will. It will go in that direction. It is designed for that. There are also commonalities within the types of groups. For example, support and social groups meet a specific need, community and connection, love bombing, secret. We have special knowledge. We're special people with the special knowledge. And then I'm not going to read this through, but it goes on to say that you must do this because there's been some changes in the Human Rights Act and some bills, and just basically they're saying that the law says that you have to do it. Now, the law doesn't actually say that you have to do any of this stuff. They're using this as a cudgel and as an appeal to authority. And And I very much believe it's a way of, if parents question anything, well, we have to do this. These rules and laws and regulations tell us we have to, but they wouldn't tell parents because it's a secret. I wonder where in the Human Rights Act does it say that you have to keep secrets from parents? Inform administration. It is necessary to share with administration your desire to facilitate a positive space group. Don't tell parents, though. Tell administration. Plan meeting details. Choose a time and location to hold positive space meetings. An ideal space may offer privacy or confidentiality. If the space is too high profile, it may discourage students who are worried about being outed by their participation in the group. However, choosing a location that is too hidden may imply positive space membership is potentially shameful or embarrassing. It's possible to enlist student voice in the selection of an appropriate space. It's key for students to have a warm and welcoming positive space location. Notice all the language, positive space location, enlisting the student voice. Make it appealing, make it inviting, but secret. To offer a sense of safety, meetings should not be held at random or by rotating locations. So this is developing this idea that you have this like club and you're going to be part of an in-group in this club, and it's going to be like a social club, but a support club. And you're going to learn all this special knowledge and you're going to discover things about the world, and it's going to be secret. You're going to have not only secret from your parents, but you're going to have this special secret knowledge. Cults do this. Cults do this. This is a typical cult indoctrination tactic. I'm just going to remind you at this point, they made very clear that this is not just high school students, it includes elementary school. Elementary school. Publicity and promotion. Advertise your positive space group. Talk about, use the student voice to find the most effective ways to promote and advertise a club, and then you have a whole list of ways of advertising. I thought they weren't allowed to advertise these. I'm not clear on that on 100%. Isn't that funny? You can tell the administration, you can publicize the group, but you still must keep secrets for parents. I'm going to keep bringing it back to that. And you still must run confidentiality and secrecy drills so that students learn from their teachers how to keep secrets from their parents. Initial meetings. One of the first tasks of a positive space group is to co-create group norms. Co-create group norms. Norms help to clarify expectations for behavior, guide interactions, and ensure that group discussions are safe, confidential, and respectful. You know exactly what those group norms are going to be, because they keep talking about things like hate speech and being respectful, being kind. We know what that means, is that this is how you are allowed to think. This is what you're allowed to think. And if you go beyond that, right, then we're going to make sure that we keep you in line with how you're supposed to be looking at it. They're going to deal with any kind of dissent. So in CRRP, they're trained on how to deal with dissenting thoughts, right? In Kevin Kumashiro, he trains specifically on creating discomfort in the student on purpose. So telling them that they're complicit in homophobia, for example. You, by being heterosexual, are complicit just in your nature with homophobia. And just like if you're not an anti-racist, you're racist. Well, if you're not actively agitating for queer rights, and by queer, I don't even mean gay. I just mean the politically queer here. If you're not actively engaging that, well, you're complicit in homophobia. So you create that discomfort. He very specifically says in his writings, which this stuff is based on, that you're going to get resistance. And he trains teachers on how to deal with resistance, because you could either get resistance that resists you in what you're saying. I'm not homophobic. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you're crazy. So we don't want that. So they're trained how to deal with that kind of dissent, which is not ideologically conforming to what they want. And he calls it, he's creating the other kind of resistance, which is to resist the system man. And it's teaching teachers on how to guide students and resolve that cognitive dissonance in the direction of social justice. That is what this group is suggesting when they're talking about creating group norms. We're going to create these norms from the very beginning so that we can hold you to account on behaving in the way that we want you to behave. And all of this with no consent or knowledge from parents. Oh, look at that. Some norms may include confidentiality, the most important one. This is the most confidentiality. It is important that members understand that anything discussed during these meetings must remain confidential. You're asking kids, including elementary kids, to learn to keep secrets. This is particularly necessary to ensure the safety and well-being of students who may choose to come out in the group. If you have to coach young kids, including elementary school kids, to keep secrets, you should not be running this group. There's no reason for you to be training kids to keep secrets. Not to mention that what you're teaching them is ideological nonsense designed to produce activists for your political nonsensory. Students need to understand that being out with the group does not mean students are out with friends or family members. It's wise to clarify immediately the significance of honoring member confidentiality. What that says, it's wise to clarify immediately the significance of honoring member confidentiality. They're creating an in-group membership, allyship, in other words. Allyship means in-group collectivist thinking. It's not your parents that you should be loyal to. It's not your family values that you should be concerned with. It's the in-group. It's honoring members of this group and their confidentiality that you should hold dear. This is unbelievable as a teacher resource. To learn more about confidentiality, including scenarios that you can role play with students, can you imagine role playing how to keep secrets from your family and other people? And I'll just say it again, not just high school, elementary school. Never assume. Members may be reminded that attendance is not a declaration of identity, because you could be an ally. We're training you to be an ally. Whether you're queer or not, we're going to train you to destroy the system. Respect, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and all forms of hate, prejudice, bias must not be tolerated. That is the ideological groupthink. We have a framework from which you can think. Anything outside of that will not be tolerated. Listen and validate. It is beneficial for students to understand that personal sharing does not mean that the group is responsible for problem solving. So long and the short of it is they're really just saying, don't question anything. They're teaching them just to accept whatever anyone says. If they say that they're a flying horse, we're going to be like, cool, you're a flying horse. That's fine. Advance agenda. Keep your team performance orientated. Encourage student leaders to co-create an agenda prior to meetings. So what they're really doing is they're teaching kids. It's not just the activism. I think this is part of the activism. They're teaching kids to be community organizers. This is the first stage of that. Is like have an agenda, go through the agenda, have the goals and meetings. Because the purpose of these, even though they say it could be a social group or support group, which a support group alone should not happen, but it's not really those things. Those things are in support of activism. Is learning to see yourself queerly from the queer perspective, which is just another form of postmodernist, neo-Marxist worldview perspective. Learn to see yourself that way or become an ally to seeing the world that way. And then we're going to teach you how to be a community activist through developing agenda, being, developing community organizations, critiquing the system. We're going to criticize the system until we get change. So that's adultifying children. It's putting in their hands, because it's student-led, putting in their hands the responsibility for changing the world, transforming society in the service of queer ideology in this case. And limiting technology, which I would normally support. But in this case, the kids can't take photos of what's going on. So I'm actually got to the point where I'm like, let those kids have phones. During initial meetings, when a new member joins, advisors may offer creative and fun ways for students to get to know each other. Get to know you activities should be non-threatening and low risk because some members maybe feel anxious or insecure about attending. Love bomb them. Okay, now we get to the real reason for this positive space club, this remarketing of the GSA and the QSA, because a lot of pushback on that, so we're going to call it a positive space. Build a plan for the future. It's important in the initial meetings to build a plan. Because it's not a social group. Social groups don't have plans. Advisors help positive space members develop an action plan. Well, a social group doesn't have an action plan. Why should we do this in the first few meetings? I thought it could just be a social group. I thought maybe they interact, maybe they don't. And an action plan that is meaningful and manageable. Encourage students to design activities, events, awareness-raising campaigns, and further the group's goals. Again, I thought this could have just been a social group. Why are they doing awareness-raising campaigns and developing these meaningful and achievable plans? Having short-term and long-term goals will help the students stay motivated and focused. Motivated and focused on what? On activism. That's the point of these groups. I wish they would just come out and say it. Now we get to the role of advisors. One of the key guiding principles for positive space advisors is to keep in mind is youth leadership. Think of this as adultifying. I would strongly recommend that you think of adultifying when we talk about student-led. Positive space should be directed by students under the guidance of adults who support their ideas and leadership. We support you kids. Your parents, they don't understand. They might not support you, but we do. We let you lead. We let you be the grown-ups. You have special knowledge that we're just going to listen to. In practice, this means students should run their own meetings, set agendas, and make all the important decisions because you're really smart. You're so smart. And you're so smart that you can do all this. Even in elementary school, you can set agendas and make all the important decisions. You don't need adults for that. We're going to help you do that. Your parents, they might set boundaries in your life. They might not let you do all the things that you want to do, but that's okay because we're going to treat you like an adult, not like your parents. We're going to let you run your own meetings, set agendas, and make all the important decisions about sexuality and how that should be disrupted in society. But remember, you can only really do this from a certain perspective because we have norms that we've set in terms of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. Positive space advisors want to empower youth. Of course they do. And ensure that students have the skills and confidence to run their club effectively. Building the capacity of students to manage the club, to think critically, to criticize everything, to criticize all of the injustices that we've highlighted to you through this club that you can't talk about outside the club because we ran scenarios on keeping secrets. And to plan short and long-term goals will not only assure the success of the group, but also help develop student leadership skills. When they talk about leadership skills, they talk about how to become a social justice activist. Leadership means political leadership. It's training them to be little political pawns. This is what transforming education is. The purpose of education has been to create far-left radical activists. And we're doing this all the way down to elementary school through this positive space club, which is really gender and sexuality, because sexualizing kids is apparently a really good method of doing that. In practice, this means positive space advisors will guide and support students as they learn how to organize and facilitate meetings, plans, implement initiatives and events, and advocate for the human right and safety of two-spirit LGBTQIA+ peoples and their peers and adults. Oh, we're doing it for adults too? Student leadership may also mean that the advisor understands when to invite students to implement their own ideas regardless of outcomes. The advisor can then support and guide students with the learning from any missteps. So we're going to teach you how to become an activist. I get it now. And then if you get it wrong, that's okay. We're here to help you get it right because we have a whole load of experience through our unions and through being socialists and through being Marxists and kind of doing all our pro-Palestine stuff and our decolonized stuff. We've been really trained in this from teacher college onwards. So don't worry. Don't worry about the outcome. We're going to help you when you misstep. After positive space meetings, events, and campaigns, the advisor may wish to facilitate a post-mortem to encourage student reflection. Reflection is criticism and self-criticism. Criticize the system and criticize yourself for ideological conformity. And they talk about that a little bit here when they say that self-exploration and reflection is an internal entry point, focuses on the advisor's own knowledge and lived experience under gender and sexual orientation. Advisors may reflect on how their own understandings and belief about gender and sexual orientation impact their approaches and interactions with students. Advisors are encouraged to apply the lens of gender and sexual orientation, so this is the queer theory lens, the queer pedagogy lens, to their professional practice and to address potential biases and misconceptions. Now remember, here, in the very beginning, it said that this is constantly evolving. It's a social construct, and because it's queer theory. And so they're constantly having to criticize and self-criticize, which is a Maoist concept. So criticize the system, disrupt the system, the hegemony and all that. We're going to criticize all that while self-criticizing. This is the reflection. We're going to self-criticize all the time in a perpetual manner to make sure that we keep in line with ideological conformity because it's constantly evolving. That's what that's saying. Personal reflection is crucial to the interpersonal work that effectively supports students and develops inclusive practices surrounding topics such as gender identity, sexual orientation. An entry point of reflection also empowers advisors to critically examine the structures and processes, like I just said, within systems of education and to make changes to remove systemic barriers and create these structures and processes, which is exactly what I just said. Criticism, self-criticism. That's the purpose of this. It's just dressed up in different language, but that's what this means. So again, that's the point of these groups because we're talking about the advisors here. So the point of the advisors is to create the discomfort, like Kumishiro, to create the right kind of resistance through ideological conformity that they were talking about and guiding in the direction of social justice. And the teachers, because this is all fluid all the time, and really it's just an excuse for communist revolution, basically, is that they have to constantly reevaluate themselves, self-reflect, criticism, self-criticism, so that if you find yourself outside the bounds of whatever's acceptable within this ideology, you need to bring yourself back in line, ideologically in line with that. And they also suggest having co-advisors. And the interesting thing here is one of the reasons they suggest having a co-author is to provide a critical friend, in italics, a critical friend for reflection. Again, criticism, self-criticism. So you don't just do it for yourself. You make sure that you have a critical friend that helps keep you ideologically in line, because you might have missed something over time. And don't worry, they'll be watching you. They'll be watching you and making sure that you're doing that. They have a few suggestions for the social element. When I was reading this initially, I really saw this as it's the love bombing. And the reason I say this is not because, look, school clubs are going to have social activities, right? It doesn't mean it's love bombing every time a school has an activity. And in those activities, you might have board games, you might have conversation starters or movie nights. Like those things are not unusual. And so, but the reason I call this love bombing is because it's not just a social club. And this document says, without saying, that the point of these clubs is to develop activism, is to have this social element mixed in with this so-called support element, which is really just the teaching kids how to think, like the framework in which they're allowed to think. And then you have the activism part. And all of this is designed to do that. And the teachers who run it are supposed to be ideologically in line as well to help guide students in their thinking. So that's why I look at this social element really as a love bombing element that creates a sense of collective in-group. But they know that because they call them allies. They're developing allies. And that's what allies sorts of mean. It's that in-group solidarity. And you add that on top, the idea that you have secrecy training scenarios and secrets from parents as well. So anyone who's not in this group doing all this social bonding and then acting as a queer activist, a politically queer activist, well, they're out group. This is why this is cult. I swear to God, this is cult indoctrination tactics. If you look at any of the other, Scientology cults or alien cults, a lot of the similarities, you'll see similarities with these. In Scientology, for example, someone who's on the outside is literally called a suppressive person. You keep secrets from those suppressive people because they're not good. They don't believe what we believe. They have bad things. They have bad thoughts, no thoughts. So this is why, to me, the social element really is not just to have a social club, but is to develop in-group preference so that they act as a collective.
People don't realize that this is very purposeful, that communists wedge themselves into the family. They don't know about the things that Stasi used to do, that Mao used to do. They don't know that communists break up families on purpose. It's not a whoopsie. They do this on purpose.
That's right. And more broadly, not to take away attention from the dirty commies who deserve the attention here, but this is cult behavior. So even if you're still out there
Yeah.
somehow listening to Jesse Kelly and on the fence about whether or not this is communism, you cannot be on the fence about whether or not this is a cult. And communism is the largest, most destructive death cult that humans have ever created, capturing the lives of over 1 billion people, destroying, and I mean literally murdering, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 million people over the last century. Communism is a cult, and so it has to separate people from their families to what they call, to establish what's called milieu control. They have to separate people from their families so they'll forget who they are and will see themselves only through the communist ideology and its application through the state.
That's the same reason they love to tear down statues and rename streets as well. On a larger level, the same reason. It's about erasing your history, unmooring you from your past so they can write your future.
You might say it's about being able to see what can be unburdened by what has been. That is actually the beating heart of the communist project. And yeah, renaming streets, tearing down statues, tearing you apart from your family. Not only are these communist bread and butter going back to the Bolsheviks in Russia and to the Chinese, the PRC in China. When we look at the Chinese case, what Mao Zedong did during the Cultural Revolution, you had young people renaming themselves with new revolutionary names. It's exactly like the trans phenomenon, people giving themselves new names with their old dead name. You had statues coming down. You had streets being renamed to revolutionary terms. And the whole idea was to tear down all of the, like you said, all of the mooring, all of the tethering to the old society so that all that there was for young people was the communist vision for what was coming for their lives in the future. And they would get these kids whipped up on this, thinking that their lives were going to be great once they destroyed all of their class enemies, including their parents, who had to be denounced, including their grandparents, their teachers, their religions. Everything in society that existed had to be torn apart and destroyed. And for about 2 years, there was mayhem in China, 66 to 68, while the young people, the Red Guard, went wild doing this until Mao got his power back and then kicked them all out to the countryside to live in misery and die.
And under support, it says some positive space groups focus on creating a safer space. Safer space means a secret space for Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus youth to share their feelings and lived experiences in secret, including elementary school kids. A support group encourages students to raise questions and discuss challenges or issues they may be facing at home. If that's what they're doing, they need to go to therapy. These teachers are not therapists. They're ideologues. They're ideologues encouraging kids to discuss challenges or issues they may be facing at home in secret in a group that their parents can't know about. At times, social and support groups function similarly. Therefore, there's some overlap in their intentions and activities. It's not one or the other. The whole point is all of the three in the Venn diagram are intended together all at once. It's the whole program, basically. And the educators kind of, if it starts one way, which will always be social, they'll guide them into the next step, which is support, right? And they'll guide them from there. Once they get the support, once they get the queer theory training, once the norms are in place and they learn about all the hidden oppression in the world and then become radicalized by those ideas, by all these terrible things that are happening in the world, which aren't true for the vast majority, then once you've been risen up, you can go into resistance. You can then resist the system. You can then become an activist. So it's a definite path, one step, next step, next step. And all the while, because it's student driven, kids think they're all doing it themselves. It's all grassroots, right? Oh, look, the kids want it. We have to do it. If they're asking for policy change because they're saying they're experiencing all this oppression, well, we have to do it. So the schools look like they're doing it because the kids want it. And also the kids think that they're driving all this change when really they've had these ideas put in their heads by adults who should know better in secret from their parents. So under activists, it says, activist groups often work to combat homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia with the intention to create more positive and inclusive school culture. That's not the responsibility of students, especially not elementary students. Groups may also explore school policies, procedures, and disciplinary approaches that are potentially inequitable and or reflect an institutionalized cis-heteronormative bias. Students may develop and facilitate learning about sexual orientation and gender identity for staff and students. So the kids, they could go teach staff and students about the new cool queer identities, Zimzer pronouns that we can all adopt now, because that's the new progressive advancement in this ideology. And where's the limitations? How can this be limited? You know, when people say kids are identifying as cats and we need to bring litter boxes in school, this document is hinting that if a kid did identify as a cat in these groups and they learn that they're being oppressed because there's no litter box, then they would have to do that. And they'd be educating the teachers on why they're being oppressed, why they can't have a litter box. There's no limitations on any of this. There's no boundaries. An activist group addresses the discrimination and harassment experienced by many in the community. Like I said, could be a cat. And then it ends with the posture of practice that I began with. So I hope you see, I feel like this is proof positive that the point of education has really become to create social justice activists, and that the so-called GSA, which is no longer called the GSA, it is now called the positive space, is the vehicle by which they want to create that. And it's nonsensical. It's not based in fact and reality. It's a way to input just ideological drivel into kids to make them feel like they're being oppressed, and if they're not acting in their non-binary friend's interest or whatever, then they are being implicit within the oppression of those people, and so they also have to act. And if you disagree, if you dissent, if you say things that are not ideologically okay, if you've not self-criticized enough, then you're not following the norms. I think this needs to be investigated. I think they need to be questioned about what the hell they're doing. And I hope that you as parents write to this school, write to your boards, write to anyone you could possibly write to Jill Dunlop, the Minister of Education in Ontario, and say, no, this is not okay.